record this on a Tuesday. I'm glad you're here. What's going on tonight, my friend?
Man, I just was enjoying listening to you be a Florida Gator truther there before the break. I'm all for that.
As a Georgia fan, right? I mean, I'm sure you are.
Absolutely.
I mean, look, LSU going 5-5 last year. Florida still can't beat them. I mean, it's glorious, right? It's a glorious thing. Graham, look, let's start off here. I'll let you tell everybody where they can follow all your great stuff, but I got to start off with this. You have been all over this SEC expansion. Look, I'm going to be honest. When I was monitoring, reading the comments, was it 18, 19, 20 hours ago, you're saying that Texas and Oklahoma could be in the SEC by 2022. You took the punches. You took the ridicule. And as it always does, this morning you were proven right. What are you hearing? I'm going to give you the floor. What do you think? What are you hearing? And we'll start there, my friend.
Yeah, so the head of the University of Texas System Board of Regents, so not just for UT Austin, but the entire University of Texas system, is a gentleman who is a very big college football fan, a guy named Kevin Eltfe, and he kind of has taken on like mythical hero status, I think, within the Texas fan base over the last week, because he seems to be the guy pulling a lot of the strings behind the scenes and making a lot of this happen. But straight up, he's a Longhorn fan, and he is tired of seeing Texas kind of in a mediocre spot and sort of, being forgotten by the time we get to October and November every college football season. So he's been pushing hard to kind of make this expansion happen. The big kind of reason that a lot of people didn't believe that report when I first put it out, saying I thought Texas and OU would be in the conference for 2022, was because they're on the hook for like $150 to $160 million buyout with the Big 12, right? So the two things you have to remember: one, this is Texas. There's always going to be a surplus of money or some big money donors that can be drawn upon. But two, Texas has had this deal with the Longhorn Network for a long time, and that contract still has a lot of time left on it. So it really looks like that the money for that buyout is going to come from what's left on the 20-year, $300 million deal that they signed with the Longhorn Network about a decade ago. So, I mean, I think the question is, the only thing I think stopping them from being in 22 at this point is just like, will the SEC be able to get everything done in time? Because that changes scheduling. It changes, some of these teams like Georgia, like Alabama too, I believe, have home and homes with Texas and Oklahoma coming up over the next 5-10 years. So it's going to throw some of that stuff in flux. But we watched during COVID, right? Like we saw teams play games on 3-4 days notice. So It can be done. So it feels like that's kind of where everything's headed, that we're going to see OU and Texas in the league for 2022.
Yeah, and let's not – look, that excuse that you got to schedule a game for 2072, okay, stop with the bullshit. I mean, excuse me for saying it.
No, yeah, you're right.
Stop with the bullshit. When you got Coastal Carolina and who do they play? Was it
BYU? Yeah.
BYU. When you have those two teams playing, I don't want to hear it anymore. Graham Coffey is joining us. Guys, we'll let him tell you everywhere you can follow his great stuff. If you have a question in the chat, hit us with hashtag Ask Graham. What do you think the SEC pumps the brakes a little bit? Because look, Oklahoma and Texas just filed to be in the SEC today. Do you think that they pump the brakes a little and find everything out? Or do you think, Graham, that over the last 6 to 8 months, the SEC has been working through this and they already have their ducks in a row? I kind of agree with you. I could see it going 2022, and you're hearing the sourcing, or 2023. Do you think that there's a chance that there's a step back here, or do you think that the SEC and Texas and Oklahoma are just full steam ahead and want to get this done as soon as possible?
My gut says that it's closer to full steam ahead. There's always going to be red tape on stuff like this and contracts and lawyers that have to get involved. But the reality here is that these conversations, like you said, they've been going on since late last year. And, there's even been some people out there that have alluded to the possibility that, when when Steve Sarkisian came and took that job and was recruiting assistant coaches out of the SEC that really didn't want to leave the Premier College Football League in the sport, that, you know, this was kind of something that was being discussed and sort of teased to some people as like, hey, you're going to come back to the SEC in a year or two. Come on down and let's do this together. So there's always something that could happen, right? So I never want to speak in absolutes on something like this, but it feels like, you know, Texas and Oklahoma have made that break from the Big 12. They're not going to want to live with their ex for, you know, any amount of time. Yeah, I mean, like, no one wants to live with their ex for 4 years. And that was my whole thing, especially yesterday when everyone was like, oh, it'll be 2025. And it's just like, let's look back in Missouri and Texas A&M when they came in the league. You know, it was about 6 to 9 months after all these conversations and announcements and votes started happening. So I think we could see him in 22, 23 would be the latest, but we're certainly not going to be waiting till 2025, in my opinion.
So we do have a fan question, and Craig Schilling, who's a good friend of ours who does a lot for us here, he does ask this, and I kind of want to add on to this, Graham, but he says, #Ask Graham, the biggest question is, how does this affect the addition of Texas Oklahoma impact recruiting? But I'm going to add on to that. So we're obviously a big Louisiana podcast, LSU podcast. A lot of people have been saying that they feel like LSU is the more impacted team in the SEC than anybody else. I kind of call that bullshit. I mean, you're going to see that on the field when you lay the smackdown on a team, right? Like if LSU beats Texas and Oklahoma in one season, recruits, regardless of NIL, you're more going to lean to a brand that's already winning. But what do you think? Do you think that this is going to affect a lot of teams, or do you think it's going to affect Texas and Oklahoma more? Like, hey, Oklahoma's winning a Big 12 conference every year. Obviously, it affects them more now coming into the SEC, right?
Right. I mean, like Oklahoma's been winning the Big 12 conference every year, like you said. But when they get into the playoff, right, like there's some issues in the defense. There's some issues on the front end. And that's ultimately where kind of things break down for them. And they've struggled to recruit certain positions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think that this probably helps them in the immediate. There's less building that has to happen for them to become, you know, national champion. And there's a lot of people that think their defense is at that level already. Alex Grinch has done a really good job there as DC.
I agree.
So, you know, I mean, I think for me, they might be my preseason national title favorite at this point.
Oh, wow.
But, yeah, I mean, but the thing I would say with Texas is, I wrote a piece on it this afternoon. They've watched so many guys leave the state of Texas over the last, you know, couple of years, and really since the CFP era started. I mean, two years ago, you know, you go and look, and it's like A&M is signing 6 of the top 13 guys in the state of Texas. Alabama has dipped into Texas a lot. Excuse me. LSU is coming to Texas historically really well, especially down in South Texas in the Houston area. So I think that this, in the eyes of Texas, no pun intended there, but I think they look at it as like the reason we're not keeping these guys in state is because, you know, they want to go play in the SEC, and who can blame them? More premier games. It's a lot more exciting than kind of playing that one big regular season game every year against Oklahoma when you're running the gauntlet of an SEC West and you're always in prime time, and, you know, you're going to have college game day there once or twice a year. So I think that it does affect LSU, but I think LSU at this point is the brand is in a place nationally where LSU can go and recruit in a lot of different places. And, you know, I mean, being a Georgia guy, I've watched LSU come in and take lots of kids out of Atlanta and other parts of Georgia over the years, and did it with a Reed Gilbert a couple of years ago. It didn't work out, but still it's evidence that, you know, they can go in and get a 5-star prospect out from underneath Georgia's nose anytime they want, if, you know, the circumstances are right. So I don't worry about LSU on the recruiting front. I do worry about Texas A&M just because it's the psyche part of it too, right? It's just like there's all the shit talking happening already of like A&M being little brother again and all that, which I don't think if you follow them, it's fair to say that. But I think it'll help Texas, but ultimately Texas has been the 5th most winning team in the Big 12 over the last decade. They have it's going to take some cycles for them to build that program to where it needs to be, especially on the line of scrimmage to compete in the SEC.
I mean, hell, look how long it took A&M. I mean,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like, it's been 10 years. I mean, like, we're on the anniversary of that's how long it took them to get to where they are, a respectable team in the SEC West division and the SEC conference, or not SEC conference, the Southeastern Conference. I'm conferencing myself.
I know. It's a lot, isn't it?
Well, I get excited, because it is exciting, right? Like, they are two brands. Let me two or three more questions I got for you here.
Yeah, absolutely. I got all the time in the world.
Oklahoma, like you talked about them being possibly your preseason champion. Why would they make that move though? Like if you're potentially, because we know what LSU did in 19, getting close to $60 million for winning a national title in the college football playoff. Why do you make that leap? Like I get the money aspect of it. But if your goal is to win a national title, like, do you think that they have more to lose than Texas? Like, so we're always talking about Texas, and nobody's talking about Oklahoma. They're just like kind of glad to be here, right?
Yeah.
Did they lose the most from all of this because they're winning? And I know I already asked that, but let's focus a little bit on them because what the impact do you see that they have in all of this?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, right? Because I think the appeal of Oklahoma right now to a 5-star recruit is you show up in the Big 12, you win the conference every year, you throw for 400 yards a game, and then you go to the college football playoff. And while that hasn't gone super well for them to this point, you got to think at some point they're going to break through and knock down that door. That's not going to happen every year in the SEC, right? Like they're not going to play for a conference title every year. They're certainly not going to win a conference title every year. And they're a good program. They may win one every 5 to 10 years or 5 to 6 years or 3 to 7 years to be determined, right? But I think it hurts them, but I also think that the reality is that we're moving into a different era of college football. And this 12-team playoff, if we look at what's happened here kind of over the last 6 months with those discussions, you got to say Greg Sankey is a ruthless capitalist, right? Like he looked at it. Yeah, ruthless, man. Like he looked at it and was like, all right, everybody's, causing a storm because not everyone can be included in this playoff group of 5 once in. I'm going to make those concessions because I don't want to deal with this in court or wherever, or, in Congress, because that's kind of some of the stuff that was being threatened. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let it be a 12-team playoff, and then I'm going to take a third of those spots every year. And so the amount of money that happens when you're talking about, four shares of a college football playoff buyout where, that CFP is probably going to be $1 billion plus contract to whoever buys it. It's a lot of money. And then, the SEC already, I think last year they doled out $45 million a school. When you add Texas and Oklahoma, and I think that's the other part, asking about the timing in 2022 and why would the SEC sort of bend over backwards to make it happen? Well, as soon as they get added into the conference, it causes a reset on all of these TV contracts. And so if the SEC wants to get out of the SEC on CBS sooner, they can go ahead and do that probably, and ESPN can buy those rights. But like you're looking at the potential of an extra, $10, $15, $20 million a year per a school. And then who knows with college football playoff shares pretty soon, the gap between an SEC team and an ACC team, maybe $30 million a year. And that's a lot to make up. So I think that's why, you've heard reports of Clemson kind of stomping their feet and trying to get the ACC to do something because everyone is sort of falling behind with this new, I mean, people are saying super conference. I think it's a fair term. I mean, even if it stays at 16 teams, if you look at the brands and who those teams are and what they've done over the past couple decades, I mean, it's tough to say that, maybe 5, 6, 7 of the top 10 teams in the sport are not in this league.
It's funny. Are you going to put in a group of 5 team in the playoff? Are you going to put Texas if they're the top 12 team? Are you gonna keep Oklahoma out? Let's just say hypothetically, Graham, you split the conference down the middle, and you have LSU possibly and Oklahoma in the West, and then you have Alabama, Georgia in the East. I mean, I'm speaking a whole bunch of hypotheticals. You mean to tell me you're going to keep those 4 teams out? They're not going to do that. And so I question a little bit if they're going – if the college football playoff expansion, has to take a step back because no one really knows what's going on with the conferences, right? Like that's a big question that I have is, do we take a step back there because Greg Sankey, Mosquito, Louisiana, bro, Louisiana. But do we take a step back there? We do have a question from Val Browning that I did want to get into with you too before we get you out of here. He says, #AskBram, is there any other schools possibly joining the SEC that you're hearing? West Virginia. So if you don't know Jake Crane from the J-Boy Show, he's talking. Yeah. He's heard that the Big 12 and the Pac-12 could possibly merge. Now, look, this dude doesn't miss, so I trust what he's getting. And then you leave West Virginia, who's on the East Coast. They're not going to go to the West. Do you think that there's other possible teams that the SEC could add here in the upcoming years?
Yeah, in the upcoming years, I do. I mean, I think I don't have anything firm enough to where I feel comfortable like saying any teams on the air, but I did get a text from a very good, very strong SEC source that knows what happens in the league office last weekend, and he said flat out, like, we're a couple dominoes from the SEC becoming 24 teams, becoming its own kind of. Well, and I mean, the words he uses, becoming its own division within college football, which
nuts. So crazy.
Nuts. No, and I mean, I grew up with, the 12-team SEC, and I remember watching, like, Jefferson Pilot with the three Daves, and it's like halfway snowy on the TV, and now you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business, right? And so that's where we've come in 20 to 30 years. It's wild to think about, but I do think that like that would be a solution to the type of situation that I'm sure you've covered on this show. And I know a lot of people are concerned about. Under a 12-team playoff, we're taking the best teams, which are probably filled with the most number of guys that have NFL prospects.
Correct.
And they're going to go play 16, 17 games. That's not right. And so I think, we could look it up in a decade, and the reality is that some sort of super conglomerate is formed, and, the SEC kind of has its own playoff that happens at the end of the season within its own conference, and maybe that's the national champion, or maybe that team goes and plays a team from, another 24-team division, and that's it. But I do think ultimately we're looking at the group of 5 teams getting frozen out of the postseason conversation at some point, just because the money's not going to be there to keep up.
Last question, we'll get you out of here. Sometimes capitalism can be a bad thing to some extent. For example, if the SEC continues to add on, I want to see LSU, who's supposed to be going to play UCLA. I want to see that. LSU's never played in the Rose Bowl. Mm-hmm. I want to go to the Rose Bowl. It has a lot of feel to it because you have an Ed Orgeron who got shafted by the guys at USC. Going back to those are the storylines I grew up loving in college football that I'm scared of, Graham, honestly, that we might not have. I don't think that Greg Sankey in and of himself is going to flip college football to a point where the SEC, I'm not going to say runs everything, but I'm sure they want to go out to California and beat the dog manure out of a USC or Oregon or whatever, right?
Sure.
But my question is, do you think that there is a chance that the SEC just doesn't really care anymore because, look, they see Mark Emmert in the Supreme Court getting his ass handed to him, and look, it's all holds bar now. Do you think that this could obviously hurt college football if they continue to add down the road?
I think it could. I also think it could help. I think we could find ourselves in a situation where we get more of those games, right? I mean, the game that I was most upset that we lost last year was the the return trip that Texas was supposed to make to LSU because there was so much bad blood and regionalism involved in that. I think college football is always going to have that unique regionalism to it where, you have all these people that are working in offices together in places like Atlanta and New Orleans and all over the country. And they think that their alma mater is better than your alma mater. And we're going to find that out on Saturday. Right. So I worry about it just like you do. But I think that those big storylines will probably always be there. And who knows, man? I mean, the future reality of this may look like where the Pac-12 and the SEC, and this is not a scoop or anything like that. I want to be really clear. This is just a hypothetical, but maybe it looks someday like the Pac-12 and the SEC have a week where they have a crossover and their teams play one another. And I think we'd all be on board for something like that. Right. So what I think is happening is this effort. When you add 12 teams to the playoff, you do dilute the regular season and the meaning of the regular season on some level. And I'll argue that with anyone, anytime.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. And so, okay, well, if we're going to get, 9 conference games or 10 conference games, and it's going to be games like Texas LSU or Oklahoma, Georgia, Rose Bowl rematch, like there's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot to be excited about. And so I'm hopeful that college football as a whole recognizes that the idea of the SEC SoCon Challenge Saturday in November every year where Bama plays Charleston Southern, I don't think people want to watch that. Right. And Georgia does it too. I mean, I'm not throwing stones, but I've talked to national college football writers that they take that weekend off because no one cares to cover that and talk about that and comment on, Bama blowing somebody out by 60. So I think that it's going to be interesting, but I do think that bringing passionate fan bases together is why the SEC is so much fun. And I think that you've added 2 really passionate fan bases in Texas and Oklahoma. So
no doubt.
I'm not at that point yet where I'm like, oh God, we're ruining it. It feels weird. I'm a little uncomfortable with it, but I'm trying to stay open because I think it could be really cool.
I just want to beat the dog shit out of Texas, bro. Who
doesn't, right?
Right. And so I'm okay with it. Give me 5-10 good years of laying the smack down, and I'm good with it. Graham, I agree with you. We align on a lot of stuff. Dude, keep doing the great stuff you're doing. Awesome follow. And to all the AYS Nation, tell everybody where they can follow you and all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at Dawg, D-A-W-G, of course, Dawg Out West. And you can also find me on dawgsports.com. That's where I do all of my writing and have been publishing some of these updates to the Texas OU SEC drama throughout the past week. So thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. We'll talk to you soon. As always, you've been fantastic. We'll talk to you later. Have a good night, bud.
Absolutely. You too, man.
That is Graham Coffey. Guys, just amazing. Look, you need to go follow him. The dude's